It's Monday, June 9th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Equality in the boardroom? Not by a long shot. Yes, we still need to have this conversation in 2025. Today on the show, we talk challenges to changes. The guests today, local women changemakers and leaders. So here's a bit of extra context to start things off. 2024, a report from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce shows women are still seriously underrepresented in top jobs, just 21% holding a seat at the boardroom table, right? 1 in 5. This is a report in 2024. I know it's 2025 now. I don't anticipate things have changed that much for those stats to be out of date, although I'm sure my guests can correct me if I'm wrong on it. We've got a full hour of discussion around this today, folks. And if you've got a perspective to share about being a woman serving on a board, get in touch with us. 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Text us, 709-327-8206, The Signal at cbc.ca. We've got 3 people here with me in studio. Carolann Harding, CEO of SmartICE. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. So we run into each other. Like, you come in for other CBC things, then I run up to you in the hallway and I'm like, hey, we mentioned ideas and you had a couple. This was one of them. Why is this such an important conversation? Other than everything I just mentioned, but enhance it a bit more. Because
we always have to have the conversation, and it's a very important to me. I mentor young women in board work, and then I have a mentor. So it doesn't seem to ever go away that we need to support each other. And I really love supporting women that want to try to go down this road and having those voices heard.
Excellent. Don Dalley is here, President and CEO of CAA Atlantic. How you doing?
Good, thank you.
This is our first time being on the show together.
It is.
What are you give us a brief, either build on what Carolann said or give us your own thoughts on a blurb for the start of this show.
Yeah, I think it's, and I will build on what Carolann said, you have to understand the role of boards and organizations, right? They're driving strategy. They're driving the longer term, bigger picture of where the organization is going. They have a responsibility typically for taking in stakeholder input, bringing that into strategy and incorporating it. So if you don't have a diverse group of voices at the table, I can tell you because I've been there, whether it's at the executive level, senior executive level, or the board, things start to sound the same. Is what happens because it's sameness, it's homogeneity around the table. So if you want to really do your best as an organization, you need those voices.
Yeah, and before I go to Laura, who's here as well, what's the problem with sameness? You talk about the diversity, so build that a little bit more too.
Well, I think that, again, we've got a community that is diverse, right? So I don't know where you would be where that isn't the case. I guess if you come down to a very narrow scope, then your communities in and of themselves are the same. But when you meld them all together into that big pot, a lot of people with a lot of differences. And you can see it sometimes in some of the news stories, for example, where companies have gone out with campaigns that have been highly offensive to some groups, right? And we sit on the outside of that and go, how did that ever get through? Who watched that? Who looked at that? Who listened to that and thought that was okay? It's not meant to be. It's a serious example, but it's also, I don't mean to be trite, but, you need to bring those voices to the table. And I've been in some of those rooms where you suddenly get enough diversity, because I know we'll talk about it today. One is not diversity, right? It's enough diversity at the table that you get a bit of a flywheel effect in the thinking. And it makes a difference. The conversations are different. The ideas are different. The creativity is different. The innovation is different because people are just coming at it from a different perspective.
I can picture that too, right? And there's examples over the years of how did this make it through? And then with what you're saying, I can also picture how it could, right? Oh, it's very easy.
100%.
Unfortunately.
Yeah.
Very easy. Very.
Laura Aguirre Polo is here. Manager, Amal, Unite, and Empower. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Give us your thoughts on just as we continue to build the early stages of this discussion. Just your start to either kind of something different or to echo or add to what's been said.
Yeah, I mean, I think similar to what was already said, we need more diversity in the boardroom, and that's diversity of gender, of different groups, because we need to be able to represent the perspectives of the populations. So, like here in the province, like who the people are, like who are we representing, but also even sometimes depending on the company and the business, diversity in terms of our stakeholders, customers, and it's gonna, we know diversity always will generate better ideas, different perspectives, so it's competitive advantage.
Tell folks, you've been on the show before a few times now, but remind folks who you are and what you do with Amal and the board work you're doing.
Okay. So I work at Amal Youth and Family Center, and I lead a program that works with newcomers across the province and employers and industry. So we are in the business of recruiting and retention. So pretty much helping newcomers to Canada who live somewhere in Newfoundland and Labrador secure meaningful employment. And we support employers and industry, outsource talent. And in the board, I'm with the Tech and L board. So I'm very passionate about the tech sector here in the province, and it's been a wonderful opportunity. And it's always, I find like there is not a lot of, like I was born and raised in Colombia. I also lived in the United States before coming to Newfoundland and Labrador. So this is home now. But for me, I also find that oftentimes it's a responsibility to be to be at the table, because I know that voices like mine are not always represented, and decisions that are made in the boardrooms are not always considering lived experiences and the perspectives and the needs and opportunities of immigrant women, of immigrants, and even like younger professionals, for example, if I could still consider myself.
Your eyes on something, it could be, like you said, like a different opinion. And then when we talk about that sameness, right, this is one step. And then if you have more and more and more, you get the diversity, this diversity of opinion, and hopefully things can go in better directions. Don, tell folks a bit more about yourself, because I gave like the title, but give us more.
Yeah, I mean, for the last 4 years, I'm from Newfoundland. For the last 4 years, I've been the CEO of CAA Atlantic, which is the Canadian Automobile Association. There's 8 clubs across Canada. The reason I say that is because there's four that are led by women. There's 4 that are led by men. So even in our own organization, which is deeply steeped in an all-male sector, I always tell the story of getting the call about the job to see if I was interested. I went, not really that interested in cars. It was a really funny response when I think about it now, because of course it's not about cars at all. It's about leading a team of great people, to do great work. But we've done a lot of work ourselves at the board of our own organization. When I came, it was generally 50-50 women and men. Still is. We've got 5 women. The board right now is 11 members, so there's 5 women and 6 men, and we're recruiting for another position now. And I would say that I brought a lot of passion to that equation. In my previous work here in Newfoundland and Labrador with Newfoundland Labrador Hydro, did a lot of work with diversity as well. I myself am a member of the LGBTQ community, so I'm very passionate about it. And I brought that lens to my own organization. And the board was there, though, to be fair. I didn't have to bring them very far, right? They came with us. So we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years on EDIA. Doesn't matter to me what's happening in the external environment. We're unapologetic about it, very passionate about it. We believe it makes us a stronger and a better organization, and we will continue to do that. And the board have adopted the same practice. So we're looking now at broader diversity on our board, and how do we get more diverse voices around the table. And we're an Atlantic Canadian organization, so we're representing all 4 provinces. And there's a lot of diversity in Atlantic Canada.
A lot of communities.
A lot of communities. Right? And how do we get those people at the table? So we've been doing a lot of work around that over the last year, and I think you're going to see some change we're seeing it in our own organization. I can tell you tone at the top means everything. We are an inclusive organization. We are welcoming people from all kinds of different cultures and backgrounds, and it has made a tremendous difference in my own organization. So now we're translating that to the board as well, right? Because again, they're responsible for governance and strategy of that organization. They need to represent what we see inside.
Carolann, what about yourself?
So I'm the CEO of SmartICE, and we're an Indigenous-led organization. So we're working very, very hard to make sure at the board level and at the staff level, the staff complement, we have the inclusion of Indigenous people. So right now at the board level, we've got 50% represent Indigenous groups, and it's excellent because we would never have that view, that local level decision making view, and what they look for and what kind of how they make decisions wrapped around ice travel, for example, because of course we work with ice travel. And then in community, we're looking always for Indigenous leadership. We co-design curriculum with Inuit societal values in mind. And we work with local governance structures to make sure that decisions are not made centrally, that decisions are actually made by the people who need to make them, that are living in the communities that they live in. So diversity in my day job, that's what we work on every single day. Like that is part and parcel. We live the values.
It's baked in.
It's completely baked in. From some of the other boards that I work on, one of them is I'm very grateful to be on the St. John's International Women's Film Festival board. And if you talk to Jen and the people at the film festival, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Adam, it's all about bringing that diversity to the public and to the big screen or the little screen, whatever you're watching it on. And so that conversation is a continuous conversation that you cannot say, we've had that now, tick, done, let's move on to another conversation. It just doesn't end. But I'm passionate enough to continue that conversation because I've got 3 young daughters. Dawn's got a young daughter. Heather, who may join us, one of our colleagues and friends, has a daughter. Everybody's got somebody in their life, whether it be a niece or a parent or a child or a friend or a colleague that really needs to have their voices heard. So that's what I do in my daytime, and in the nighttime, I'm doing a lot of board work.
So not a lot of Netflix.
Not a lot of Netflix. No, I must admit.
And I can hear the Don's point on leadership, right? I can hear that through everything you're saying there. From SmartICE, the values that are part of the organization, and then how, like for yourself, with the St. John's International Women's Film Festival and other boards that you do the work on because you're living it, because it's important, those values get brought to other places where you are and operate and function.
It has to be. And I also sit on the Atlantic Canada Aerospace and Defence. So you talk about a sector that is male-dominated, which is the aerospace and defence sector. So it's really good to be able to sit to the table as a female and make sure that just different questions are being asked. And that goes for any board that I sit on. I'm sure Dawn and Laura can speak to that. Even though you may agree, or maybe you don't agree, but you have to be bold enough to be able to say, hang on now, let's just pick this apart a little bit. Because that groupthink that Don alluded to gets you nowhere. It absolutely gets you nowhere.
Yeah, you did. You end up down some rather unfortunate paths with groupthink.
We get nowhere.
Yeah. Nowhere, or completely undone.
That's right.
Colleen Kennedy is on the line. Gros Morne Cooperative Association. Hi, Colleen. How you doing?
Oh, good morning. Fine, thanks. Glad to be on.
How long have you been involved with boards?
So I've been involved with boards over 30 years now, basically starting with social boards, local to the community, but then expanded to, get involved provincially and nationally. So, and I work for a not-for-profit, which got a board. So, yeah, quite a bit of learning over the last 30 years. Has been quite an education.
How many boards have you served on, do you think? Because
Carolann
sent me a list, and I was like, oh, my gosh.
I did. I sent you a list. Somebody said, are you a professional board member? And sometimes I think, yeah, I am. But I started to get involved when I moved back to Newfoundland in my community. And where I'm from, I was listening to the other ladies. Where I'm from, I was fortunate to have a lot of female leaders in community positions. So, it wasn't uncommon to have a female mayor in rural Newfoundland. It was more like the women took hold and ran the communities, ran the social programs. But I think we've moved way beyond that. And so in my later years, it was more in economic development and that I focused on. And, quite a bit of change in the 30 years from where we started. Women who sat around the tables, I think years ago, were a seat, and really not always with the respect that went with that seat. And I really do think in the last 30 years, that's changed tremendously. I think we sit to a table now with respect. We're heard. Our opinions matter, which I'm not sure they always did. But I most of the tables I sit to now are very professional. It's just not women that's being considered. There's other minority groups, stakeholder groups that should have a voice at that table. Youth has always been a hard one because they don't have a network to feed back into. But I do think there's a real desire to have balance and diverse opinions around these tables now that probably weren't there years ago.
So what work do you think needs to continue, right? You mentioned the youth side of it. You've talked about the changes that have happened over the years and voices being heard finally. Through your perspective, your lens, through the work you're doing, what other changes do you think and what other work needs to be done to bring these changes in?
I do think we need to really focus on, in our diversification, how that leads back out into the community or to that stakeholder group. And it was easier for me to use youth as an example because we keep adding them to boards and wanting their voice to be heard. And I don't think they have enough of a network behind them. We really have to work on how they can be, heard and be contributing and have that network to feed back out to. And they really don't have that. There's a certain sector in that youth group that after you leave school, there's sort of a disconnect in communication. So, I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do think it's not just a matter of having a board that's diverse, is having a board that's diverse, but also engaged and heard.
Getting a lot of nods of agreement here around the table. Colleen, anything else before I let you go?
No, just, I do think that continuing to talk about diversity on boards, the importance of that is crucial. And I think that for me, it's, the best thing I could say I walked away with in 30 years is an education on how to be heard, how to be engaged, and how we all connect. So thank you very much for taking the time and, listening to different perspectives.
Colleen Kennedy, thank you for your time on this today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
You too. Thanks. Bye now.
Colleen Kennedy there, Gros Morne Cooperative Association, plus like a bunch of boards. The list was, I was looking this morning, I'm like, oh my gosh, how many boards is this? Thoughts on what Colleen was, there's a lot there, I think, that we could kind of unpack.
Yeah, I think the youth piece stands out for me. Yeah. I mean, listen, I have to cast myself back a while, decades, to be honest. But I remember coming out of university, right, and trying to get some experience myself. And for whatever reason, I honestly couldn't tell you why, but boards were always in my sort of on my radar as a way to get experience. I think it's because, a lot of them are volunteer boards, right? A lot of the nonprofit charitable boards are volunteer boards. And I was just very fortunate. I also lived in a small rural community in British Columbia in my 20s. And, when you're in small communities the way Colleen is, everyone. Yeah. And so it was very easy to make connections, and it was it's almost easier to volunteer than it is in urban centers. But I encourage a lot of the young people that I'm mentoring to get out there and, try to be on a committee, like try to get into a board, offer up your time. And if you have solid skills that you can bring to a board, because a lot of those smaller charitable boards are actually sometimes working boards. They're not just governing, they're actually hands-on doing work. And so it's a great opportunity for young people.
This is like real, low bottom level question coming at you now. What is that work? If I'm talking about young people trying to get them to get interested in this, what is the actual work of a board?
So I guess it depends on the type of the board.
Yeah, that's right.
Right? Whether it's a governance board, an operational board, or a management board. So maybe, Dawn, you could talk about your board and what they do.
Yeah. I mean, my board's a governing board. Yeah. So I run the business and I report to the board. But it's my job to manage and oversee and lead day-to-day operations across the company. It's the board's job to govern the organization. They have a fiduciary responsibility. So they have a responsibility to oversee strategy, to oversee risk, to oversee ethics, code of business conduct, operations. If you look at the structure of a board, it's a good way to kind of see it. Like we've got a HR committee, we call it a people and culture committee, right? So we have people that have that background on our board that question me as management, me and my executive team about what we're doing. We basically run it by the board. I always say the board holds our feet to the fire. Right? They're an independent set of voices. Again, if they're diverse, it's amazing, right? Because you get a different lens than you get day to day. You got to understand, day to day, I work rounding. People work in their organizations around 2,000 hours a year. A board, on average, works anywhere between 100 and 200 hours a year. So they've got this distance.
Yeah, they come in,
right?
they look at your plan, they read about it, they look at it, and then there's voting or questioning or decisions around it.
And sometimes they send it back, and you do a little more work, and you come back again, and because they have a lot of oversight, right? Governed by the bylaws of the organization, by the governance policies. We've got a people and culture committee. We also have an audit and risk committee, so they're responsible for the oversight of the financial statements, making sure that they are the audit is clean and that has been done properly, and they have a responsibility to stakeholders in order to do that. And then we also have what we call a special projects committee, which helps us with new business development, investments, things like that. So, that kind of gives you a sense of the kind of areas of expertise that we look for on the board.
Laura, I was going to ask you, when we talk about trying to get younger folks in, right? Because you and I talked about this morning. What would your message then be? If you're hearing Dawn there, like what are your thoughts around telling folks, hey, like you might be able to do this, but here's how you can go about doing it.
Yeah. So I think something Dawn mentioned was maybe even like starting on a committee, and like I find like getting out there, meeting people, but also I think finding organizations that align with your own mission and values. I think that's a very important part of it, and because it's gonna take work. So I feel like that's something that really was important for me. So like right now I'm on the Tech&L board, I actually started on the diversity committee a few years ago, and that was a great way to learn about the organization, about the team management, and see how they operate. And then when the opportunity came to be on the board, it helped me make the decision because I really knew the organization and the people and what their mission, and it aligns with something I'm very passionate about, and I wanted to contribute. So that really kind of like helped making that decision. And I know, when it comes to like young people or newcomers to Canada, so Colleen mentioned the network. I think that's it can be a barrier to be part of a board of a committee when oftentimes, like if you don't have that network or you don't know the people or the organization. So like really finding opportunities to volunteer, to attend events, I feel like that can really help. And yeah.
Yeah, I think especially in Newfoundland and Labrador, that networking thing, because if you grow up here, the person you went to grade 6 with is one of the people you see across the room at an event. You're like, oh, I haven't seen you in years. Oh, yes. And then you're in. And if you're a newcomer, the grade 6 person is not there. And you need to build that network, and it is a lot of work. Right?
It is, yeah, absolutely.
But it's also our responsibility for those on the board to
help. It's a leadership thing.
It's to help them feel comfortable on the board, to help mentor them if they're not quite sure of what to do or how to do it. I just want to add a little bit to what Dawn had said. Boards in general, people, if they've never had any board experience, they really don't know what they're getting themselves into. So your question is very valid. What do you do on a board? Yeah. And so with a governance board, which there is likely more governance boards than anything in this country. And the one thing that stuck with me, certainly during the training that I've done, and anybody that has done the ICD, Director's Education Program, is that oftentimes boards are mired down in what happened instead of looking ahead. And that's the one thing that the board really needs to do, is look ahead. So that strategy that Dawn talked about is, okay, where are we going to be in 5 years? And so one of the things that really, really stuck with me is 70% of the work should be foresight. 20% of the work should be oversight of what's happening now, and then just 10% on hindsight. Because if you stick in the hindsight, you'll never get forward. And so I always keep that in mind, even with the on the staff level, as well as at any of the boards that we're looking at. And part of that is to be able to mentor and invite new members into the board so that they can understand that.
I mean, I feel just even from my job, I'm always interested in where I'm going, right? Where are we going? What's coming down? Like, where's this ship sailing to, folks? Yes, I'll dip back in every so often and look at where we were, but it's all about, like, me is today, tomorrow, next week, next month, and it's forward thinking. So I can only imagine with a board and a company what you're trying to do and for the responsibilities of it.
And that momentum can be halted by, like, a bad apple. Yeah. Like it really can be.
Yeah. Are we going to go there?
Sure. Let's do it. No, we're there. Talk to us about it. It's too late.
I don't particularly want to go there, but that momentum is incredibly important, right? Yeah. And back to that group think again. And I often say, if I've been quote unquote invited to sit on a board, I look at the board makeup.
Yeah.
How long have these people have been there? What color are their hair? Now, I'm saying that, I have a few gray hair. But if these people have had 15, 20 or 10 years in a board, how welcoming are they going to be to have somebody new come into the board? Yeah. They need me. They need Laura. They need Dawn. They need Colleen. But it's also very difficult when one person is trying to make the change. It's impossible. So how much do you stick it out, or then do you go somewhere else where you know that you're on that path, the value alignment is there, and you know that you can make a difference? And that is why ultimately we want to be on boards, is that we can make a difference. And, it's a good use of our time. It's a good use of the time that we're sitting there. My first board experience was a school council. I was like, oh, all right, this is what this is about, a school council. And then, but it was after the school council that I realized this was my first board experience.
Huh.
It really, really was. And that was like learning ground.
So what did that give you?
That gave me a little bit of a jump start to say there's a better way to make decisions, that everybody's voice is heard. So that drilled it home to me. But I didn't have any training. It was just, this is...
No, you came in, you looked around, you're like, these things could be better.
Things could be better. Things could be better. And then you commit to making things better.
And listen, I sort of joke half-heartedly about the bad apples, but
I know,
boards are like anything else. Sometimes you get great board members. Sometimes you get people that are less than stellar. So I think that's life, right? It doesn't matter where you are. But I mean, I've had the absolute pleasure. Like, some of my greatest friends are people I've sat on boards with, because not only do you do the work, but you collaborate and you build this real collegial relationship through the board work that you do. And, it's an incredible feeling. And I will say, for anyone new coming onto a board, because like Carolann, I think your question's actually very sage. People wonder what you do. Most progressive boards have something called board mentors or board buddies, we call them, right? So when someone new comes to the board, we have someone actually kind of mentor them, sit next to them in meetings so they can ask questions. We have a really progressive, any good board does, to be fair, like a really progressive and new, or board onboarding, right? So when people come in, they're briefed by management, they're briefed by the chair or the chairs of committees, depending on the organization, so that you come in prepared, right? It's not like someone, although I started a board where I walked into the first meeting and it was like 3 full binders and it was like, plump, it was probably over 1,000 pages of work, and it was welcome to the board. I was like, oh my God, it was like a deer in the headlights, Anyway, I'm not shy, so that didn't put me off at all. But, it's very, because to be fair, sometimes when you're on a board, the questions that you ask, which are those simple questions that you think, oh, what should I ask that, are the very insightful questions that drive someone to think differently about it. That's why that turnover in boards is really, really important. It's not just diversity and having more women, more equity-deserving groups at the table. It's also just having fresh voices, whether they're young, they're old, they're, upside down. It doesn't matter. They come with a different lens and they ask a different question.
Yeah, as opposed to, some of the answers you'll get is, yeah, we tried that before. No, that's been done. That was thought of. No, we don't want to. And you're like, oh, but no, can we? It's a different, that was 20 years ago. There's, the internet's here now.
And each individual can bring something new, right? So whether you are an individual with 30 years of board experience, you probably have board experience that means in your 20s or 30s, and then you're learning completely different by the time you're in your 50s or 60s. Maybe it's focused around children. And then all of a sudden, 30 years later, it's focused around elder care. And so the type of board that you sit on could be completely different. Your motivation for being on that board is a little bit different because it's resonating with where you are in your life at that time. So I was on the Youth Symphony Orchestra when my daughter played the violin in the Youth Symphony Orchestra. And I wouldn't be on that board now because I don't have that passion for that anymore. She's well beyond that now, and then now I'm on to something else kind of thing. There's something out there, though, for everybody, I believe, if you're interested in that.
We've got Michelle Snow on the line, calling from St. John's. Hi.
Hi, Adam. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
I'm well, thank you. Thanks for taking my call.
Oh, no, happy to. Any thoughts on the discussion today?
Well, first of all, thanks for bringing up this topic. It's one I think that we need to have a lot more conversation about. I'm quite passionate about having women and diverse voices in all areas of decision-making, boards being no exception, and you've got a great panel assembled there this afternoon, so really great to be having this discussion. I guess one of the things that I've discovered in having countless conversations with women, either trying to recruit them for boards or to help them advance their board career, is that women often feel like they're not ready or they're not well positioned to take on a board role, when I would look at their resume or their background and think they're highly capable individuals who have a lot to offer. And I think, Don, you mentioned this a few moments ago about sometimes people feeling like they need to be subject or content experts in the subject matter that the board is about. And we know practically that often is not the case. You often have lots of people around the table who are subject matter experts, and what you're looking for is that diversity of thought. So if we get rid of the myths for women that, you need to be subject matter experts to be appointed to a board, we know that there's still lots of other barriers. And I'd love to hear from your panel what some of the things or advice they would give to women who might be considering a board career but are feeling like they may not be ready or it might not be for them. What sort of advice would they give based on their own experiences that would encourage those women to put their names forward?
First of all, fantastic question. And I'll equate this to women when they look for work. And I may have the stats wrong, so someone can correct me afterwards. But I've seen evidence of this, that, men will often look at a position and, have 60% of the skill and qualifications and think, God, I am number one for that opportunity, and apply. Whereas women see themselves needing 100% of the skills that are there. I often tell people when you're stepping up into a role, if you've got 60% of the competencies that are qualifications that are required for that role, you're qualified, because you need to grow into that role, right? So, I'm willing to bet that there's not a woman out there working. If you wanted to be on a board, for God's sakes, connect with me on LinkedIn, because I can assure you are qualified. And back to Carolann's point, there's just a broad base of boards out there looking for people with HR backgrounds, legal backgrounds, just lived experience, depending on the groups that they're serving. Like it's just, the opportunity is out there. You just need to have the confidence, honestly, to take the first step off the 1,000-foot pole. And that might mean reaching out on LinkedIn to any of us here and saying, hey, I'm interested. Do you know anyone? I will provide a reference. I will connect people. I've done it my entire life for jobs and boards. I will do that for anyone. So it's just having the courage, I think, to take that first step.
Laura?
I totally agree. I feel like when the opportunity came for the Tech&L board, I was interested because one of the skills they were looking for were people with experience in the immigration, diversity, and the startup ecosystem here in the province. And I had that. But I even then was like, I'm not sure I'm ready. Because, everyone on the board were people who are like, CEOs, leaders that I admire and respect a lot. But I was like, I'm not sure I'm quite ready, although I meet what they're looking for. And it helped being able to reach out to a couple of people and asking. But again, it goes back to when we don't have that network, we don't know the people, it makes it. But I think it's believing in ourselves and trusting and ask,
Well, what's the worst thing that could happen?
Exactly, right?
Someone doesn't respond to you, someone says no.
Yes, and I think that's the thing, be encouraged. Sometimes we don't.
I think we need to work on the narrative. And the narrative is really, really important. There is an assumption that you need to have a degree or an MBA or a doctorate in this, that, or the other thing, but that's not true at all. It's the experience that you bring to it. So, Michelle, great question, because it's the narrative. And I helped a young lady recently, and she told me her education and her background, but there was a little bit of a deficit in the wording. And I said, let's flip this. I said, you've got 20 years experience supplemented by this particular post-secondary education. And she just got her first board role. So it was very much the narrative has to flip. And there is this thing called a board profile or a board resume that looks completely different than a resume that if you were to go out and get a job. And so those are the types of things that, Michelle, you help people do that. I could help people do that. Dawn, I'm sure you have helped people do that. And it's about pulling out the threads of the values, the experience, and the really good stuff that you bring to the table.
Absolutely.
Any other thoughts or questions, Michelle?
No, it's just, again, thanks for bringing up the topic. I think there are a lot of women out there and people from diverse backgrounds that we really need their experiences and perspectives in many of our decision-making tables, including boards. I think we probably just need to be more vocal and open about encouraging people. And when we see prospective talent or individuals who we think might have an opportunity to join an organization that we're familiar with, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to proactively reach out to that person and suggest, are you thinking about this? I think you would be a great fit. Don, similar to what you expressed, my experience has been people, not only women, need to be asked, but they often need to be asked multiple times, more so than many of our other counterparts. And so I think we all have a responsibility to be able to do that, because I think, like you've all expressed, my board experience and career has been extremely valuable and personally rewarding to me. I've met great people, I've done great things, I've been involved in great opportunities, all because I stepped forward to put my name forward for a particular board or organization. So,
Thanks so much, Michelle.
Thanks.
All right,
have a great day.
You too. Great call, great questions, great insight. So, folks, if you want to do like Michelle did there, if you've got thoughts about women serving on boards, if you've got experience, which is kind of the sweet spot for today's discussion, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Emails thesignal@cbc.ca. The text line, 709-327-8206. Here with me in the studio, Don Dalley, President and CEO of CAA Atlantic, Laura Aguirre Polo, Manager Amal United in Power, and Carolann Harding, CEO SmartICE. Anything else off of what Michelle was saying?
I really believe, and Michelle and I have actually talked about this before, is that their opportunities are not necessarily written either. Sometimes the recruitment are not written for diverse populations. And so they don't see themselves in some of the written and promotional materials for when boards are actually recruiting people. So that's a problem.
Well, yeah, because then for what we've just discussed, right, to think that you might get someone to apply for that with all of the perhaps the self-imposed kind of barriers over, like, well, I don't think I'm quite ready. And then when you look at the writing, it's like, well, I'm definitely not if you look at this. And to think that person might go and try to spin things so that they're, like, the best of them can fit with it, it's so far apart.
It's so far apart. And you have to put these notices where people are.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to recruit, I'll give you a SmartICE experience, was that we were recruiting for a program, and it was particularly men were applying, and I'm like, where's the women? Yeah. And they were like, well, this is who we got. And I'm like, yeah, but where'd you put the flyers? I'm like, okay, let's regroup. Let's put the flyers in other places where we know everybody will be in attendance and everybody can see the bulletin boards. And it made a big difference. So it's about meeting people where they are, going to where people are, making those phone calls, but having that written word for the recruitment, be very inclusive from the very beginning, that they actually can see themselves in it. That's why I think it's important that we're sitting here today, because other women then say, oh, see it to be it. And I really, really believe in that, is that if other women need to see other women rising to that challenge, whether it's a board, leadership, C-suites, management positions, whatever that may be. But if they don't see themselves, then it's harder for them to make that okay, I think I've only got 60%. I'm going to give this a whirl. Instead of saying, wow, I got 60%. I'm going to go for this.
Yeah, there's a flywheel effect too, which, that you need a certain number. Like having one woman on the board is not enough to break through. And so you need to have that level of diversity really at the table. It needs to be multiples, right? You need that support. You need that voice. Just can't be one voice. It needs to be multiple voices. And what I've found over time is when you go in to the board itself, let's say you're going out and you're recruiting a new candidate. I've seen people refer people like themselves because their network is typically like them. And so, I don't know. If I were to press in my network and look at my broader network, I've done this as part of diversity exercises I've done, right? It's mostly women in their mid-50s today. I might scoop down to mid-40s, but, if you're looking for a woman in that range, I'm your person, and I've got a few people around the periphery, but my close network are the same. And so I found that on my own, my organizational board, is that when we've gone out, when the white men go out and tell their networks, we get more white men applying. So that's what happens. So we found to break through that this year, for example, in our board recruitment, we went to a recruiter. We went to an executive and board recruiter that has networks and are into those equity-deserving communities, so that we found that was our way to get into that community. Because when we posted the board appointments, we as well got the same people. And so it was like, good Lord, how do we break through this and get into these communities and tell people that this is a great place to serve? This is a great organization to be part of. So organizations struggle as well trying to get to the communities as much as the communities struggle to get into the organizations.
I see the same thing with media coverage, right? If you're all one type of person, you're going to be doing all one type of stories.
Right.
And it's right across the country. And once that starts changing and teams change and you've got folks from different communities, you get a diversity of opinions, voices, and coverage, and how you cover things is different that way too. So, these things, albeit different, they sure do rhyme.
Mm-hmm. Right? I'd like to bring up the topic of an ally.
Yes, please.
While, I'm all about bringing young women and women in general into the boards, we need allies. Yeah. We need allies on the board, and other groups need allies. And so it's really, really important to have and to identify those allies on the board that are pro-diversity. That's critical. And I've done panels where I've insisted that we have a male ally on the board. And they were like, why? And I'm like, because they're always going to be at the board table, and we need to find those male allies to be at the board table and to help recruit those diverse populations into it. So I just thought I'd mention that because I think that's critical in boards moving forward.
How do you know if someone's actually an ally? Because again, to be the guy at the table here, a lot of guys will say a lot of things, right? And they're like, "Oh, I'm an ally." Are you? Right? And so what's the process for figuring this out?
Well, from my point of view, they're actually walking the walk.
Okay.
Right? So there's one thing to just say, "Oh, yeah." But if they're actually introducing you to people, they're holding space for you, they're bringing you into a room, well, then it's meaningful.
Yeah. I think that's so important, the allyship on the board, and even similar to the conversation about being proactive in the recruitment, because I feel like we had a similar experience recently when we were recruiting for the technical board, where we didn't have a lot of diverse representation of people applying. And we reached out to people, but then similarly, people were too busy to do it, really want to. But then going back to, I think you mentioned, Carolann, about even the wording before in promotion. Right. I think that's so important because I think sometimes similar to when we are advertising for a position for a job, it's like people may not ask and assume, oh, that's going to be way too, too much time. I don't have the capacity. But if we are able to offer details, or if we are great allies ahead of time and reach out to people, then I think that can really help. I know in my experience, I have had some awesome men allies here in the province, especially in the tech sector, that have made a huge difference in my career and in my experience on the board. And I have seen that even in terms of, when you hear oh, so-and-so said such a great thing about you. They are really great supporters of your work. And it's even, when you are not at the room, in the same room,
yeah,
and you know that somebody actually, promoted you or promoted your work, and like they just took the time to think about you. And those small comments, references can make a huge difference. So that's something I have really appreciated here, and we need that.
Yep, and that's walking the walk. Yeah.
Alice, where else do you want to go in the conversation?
What other kind of nuggets? What? Back to the question about what we do on a board. Sometimes board members think that they can do better than the managers or the CEOs that they do. But realistically, boards that are out there listening today, if there's anybody that is actually on a board that you feel this way, is that some basic governance 101 training is really, really important to understand that, the board has one employee, and that's the CEO or the executive director. And then the executive director, CEO, the management, runs it. They really do. And we execute on that strategy that Dawn talked about. But there's a real misconception. So of learning about what it takes to be a board member, really what does a board do, what does management do? So understanding that balance between what a board does and what management does is really critical. It's critical in the understanding so that the person can come to the table and they know the expectations, that they're not going to be actually doing the books, or doing the hiring, unless it's a hiring committee or something like that you have. But the board has one employee, which is us. So Dawn and I each have 12 bosses, right? Or 10 bosses or whatever we have on the board.
I don't like to think of them that way. I think of the board, right? I report to the board and not 12 individuals. I know you didn't mean it that way, but that's, I agree with Carolann's point. It's the old, nose in, fingers out. And as a good CEO, here's how I describe. So the board chair, I don't want to go too deep into governance, but the role of the chair is really important on the board. So the board chair leads the board, right? I lead the organization. And the way I describe it to my own chair when she took the role was, you and I are co-pilots. We're flying the plane together. Right? She's got certain responsibilities over here, and I've got certain responsibilities over here. And that relationship with the board chair is critical to my role, but she also helps the board to stay in the lane, right? So when they start drifting out, taking off ramps in to operations, I can tell you I know it and I feel it, and I'm very quick to say, ooh, back on the highway, folks. I'm running the organization. You're the board. So it is really important to have some foundational governance training, and it's easy to find. Can I just say, it's one thing to do the ICD, the Director's Education Program. That's a fairly extensive course. I did a nonprofit governance course before I did that. On online platforms, there are actually free governance courses out there that you can do that are really quite good. So I would encourage people to get the basics down before you step into because you'll do better in an interview. You'll just feel more comfortable stepping in if you're prepared in that way. And you can see the difference when people don't have that, and you're picking it up organically through the board work that you're doing. There's nothing wrong with that. I would say I didn't have the education I had when I first stepped on boards now. I knew very little back then, so I learned it as I went. But the opportunities are out there today to have that training.
We started the show with a stat, right? 21% holding a seat at the boardroom table. So 1 in 5 board seats held by women in this country. And we've talked a lot about, from everything of looking at the composition of boards, encouraging folks, talking about allyship. What else needs to what are some of the changes that need to happen to get things tipping more? Because there's a lot of great work being done. There's a lot of leadership being done. There's a lot of communication happening. It is here. The fact that we're having this conversation today, right? The fact you're giving your time for this conversation, for the word to continue to go out is an excellent thing. But what else needs to happen to change these numbers?
You said tone at the top before, Dawn.
Yeah.
And that's that. I love that expression.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down. I was like, tone at the top.
Tone at the top. Yeah. Because if you have one individual in an organization pushing things forward or pushing things up, it just doesn't work. It all falls on one person's shoulder for diversity or that woman or that cultural group or whatever. It does not work. And the tone at the top, it has to be there. So the top of the organization, the top of the board, and it has to be pushing downwards as part of your philosophy, your strategy, your value system. And so there's a lot of companies and or organizations that they got to do a check. They got to do a check to see.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and can I just say, as a consumer, I go to organizations' websites a lot, and I look at who's on their executive team, and I look at who's on their board. I look at the composition. I look at the makeup, and I create, honestly, an impression of an organization based on that, because that to me speaks volumes to the values of that organization and whether or not I want to do business with that organization. So if I'm going to find a professional firm with the accountants or lawyers, et cetera, I look to see who's sitting at the executive table, who's making decisions. So it does have influence, and I think if everyone should feel that they have that little bit of power, as they go out, and whether it's laying down dollars or deciding you're going to give your time, right? Look at that organization, say, does that organization represent me and my community? Oh, yeah. So I think we all have a little bit of power in this.
And do we have enough tone? So like we talk individual boards, right? Individual companies, but federal government, provincial government, town, cities, there's lots of tones at the top, right? Do we feel the environment for tone at the top is adequate right now, coming out of these different levels?
I mean, I think things have gotten better, right? And you don't want to negate that they've gotten better. And I double down on Carolann's point about allies at the table. You can't run the diversity race without men being at the table. Like it just doesn't work, right? And everyone has a contribution to make. But I mean, progress feels slow, depending on the circle that you're in and how well. I mean, we've done well, right? So it feels great that we're there. But, if you're not lifting up the people behind you, then what are you doing? And I think that's part of probably, I assume that's why we're all here today, why we want to talk about this, because we want to put the rope back down and pull other people up and bring them with you. And that's not just about mentoring or being allies. That's about active sponsorship. The first significant board that I got on was because, honestly, a professional colleague / friend recommended me for it. Like, she made a call, in the middle of the night, whatever it was, and said, hey, here's a name. And suddenly I was on a great board and had a great experience. So, that's what we should all be doing, is lifting people up as we go. But it's slow, Adam. And I think
one person at a time, one organization at a time.
Yeah. And having the influence and spreading the word like we're all doing today. I'm not a big fan, although I know some countries have been very successful around setting thresholds and targets. And that you certainly see that in a lot of publicly traded companies, and in some countries it's been successful. I think you see a lot of backlash to that, because people assume then that people are getting that on that board or that spot and they're not qualified. I like to tell people, I know tons of qualified people from tons of equity deserving groups. We just have to make space for them and get them to the table.
Final thoughts from me, Laura?
I had something and I'm like, you mentioned something about the when it comes to the oh my god, what was it? I think I totally lost it.
It's okay. I'll keep tossing.
It'll come back.
Words at you.
I know. I think
It'll
it will come back. I had no.
Final thoughts for anyone? We've got like a minute and a half left.
Oh, okay.
On Facebook where you see, the little meme, right, that it says, be the woman that straightens the other woman's crown, right?
Yeah.
And that's how I feel, that I will give the voice of another woman or an equity deserving group in a space where at all possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So I will take advantage of any of that. Could be in a conversation with one person. It could be in a room. It could be to a funder. It could be to anywhere. But I will take that opportunity at any given time to do that.
Yeah, have folks feel seen and heard.
Yeah,
right? Which is
absolutely.
like such a big thing.
I mean, that's why I'm here today. And that's what's gotten me to where I am today, because I didn't do it by myself. It's the community around us that's really helped us.
I think I got it back.
Yes, just in time.
Yeah, when you were saying about you go and look at the organization and the makeup of the board, I think that also applies to talent. So I know that, in the space where I work right now, where we support employers and industry attracting talent, it is also something to consider. When we look for the next place where we want to work, we always, especially people from diverse backgrounds, we look at, and I always encourage people, look at the board, look at the leadership. Is there representation? Are there people that look like you there? Because otherwise, maybe think twice.
Yeah.
if you want to be the first diversity hire in that organization. So even when it comes to attracting great talent, I think there is also some value in that.
We're out of time. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
That was fast.
It tends to fly by. Tomorrow, folks, completely different conversation. It's gardening season, and it is Tuesday. We are talking gardening with Dan Rubin, so if you want grow tips, get in touch with us. And if you just want to call us to talk about what you're growing, we love that too. Cheers.